Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Coffee with the Candidate. For those of you all who are joining us for the very first time, my name is Ronetta Francis, and I'm a candidate for the Arkansas State Senate District 1. And during this time of COVID-19, social distancing, we've adjusted so many aspects of our campaign. But one of the things that we incorporated to make sure that we were staying connected with the community were these Coffee with the Candidate segments. And over the course of the last couple of months, we've had a lot of different guests to come on, I feel like Oprah or something, to come on the show and to share their insight and experience and just some really relevant information with us. And today is no exception. I am delighted for a number of reasons to introduce to you all and to welcome to our Coffee with the Candidate segment Ms. Jessica Scott, who is the Arkansas chapter leader for Moms Demand Action. And for a variety of reasons, like I said, I'm excited to have her, but one of the first and foremost brand new hot off the presses is that our campaign has received an endorsement from Moms Demand Action as a gun sensible candidate. And I am thrilled to be able to carry that. We're going to talk so much about why this endorsement means a lot to me, why the organization specifically has such significant goals and objectives and work that they're doing, not just in Arkansas, but across the nation. So welcome, 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 Jessica. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Ronetta. I'm excited to be here and to talk about an issue that is really close to my heart and something I feel passionate about.
So give the audience an overview of Moms Demand Action. For those who may not know, you've got your great shirt on, you're doing your branding there, Gun Sense in America. I love it. Give a little overview of Moms Demand Action.
Sure. Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to gun violence prevention. We were founded by stay-at-home mom Shannon Watts the day after the horrific shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And she basically recognized that while there were other organizations working on legislative issues, particularly surrounding gun violence, no one else was working on it in the same grassroots style that she had seen be successful with groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Mm-hmm.
And it very quickly became a national movement. We now have chapters in all 50 states plus Washington, D.C. Yeah. And here in Arkansas, we have 10 local groups based all over the state. So we've really been an active part of working on gun violence prevention here in Arkansas.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And you mentioned that the organization was born out of the tragedy in Sandy Hook, and just recently, just a few days ago, marked the 5th anniversary of the horrific tragedy in Charleston, South Carolina, where the gunman took the lives of 9 worshipers at Mother Emanuel Church there. And it just goes to show that the work that the group is doing is still needed. And to this day, even 5 years later, and we're going to talk about that, there are some loopholes that were, that this gunman, particularly in South Carolina, was able to take advantage of in the current legislation that allowed him to acquire this firearm that otherwise he wouldn't have been able to. You want to talk a little bit more about that, particularly because we're thinking about like what has happened since then to kind of close those loopholes?
Sure, and unfortunately, the answer is not enough. So the loophole that you're talking about is sometimes known as the Charleston loophole, because it allowed the gunman in Charleston to acquire a gun that he should never have been able to purchase. The shooter had a history of drug convictions and absolutely would have failed a federal background check that's required when someone tries to purchase a gun through a licensed gun dealer. However, there's a loophole in that law that says that if the federal background check does not come back within 3 business days, that the gun dealer has the option to sell the gun anyway, to basically use their own best judgment.
Okay.
So this obviously opens the door for less than reputable gun dealers to sell to people that really should never have guns. So he was able to purchase the gun legally from this gun dealer, and then we know what he used that gun for. So there was a lot of push immediately following the Charleston shooting, and a bill was introduced and very quickly passed in the House to close that loophole by extending that period during which a gun dealer would not be allowed to sell that gun from 3 days to almost 2 full weeks.
Okay.
And that bill is still sitting on Senator McConnell's desk, waiting to be considered, and we've no reason to think that he's going to bring that to the floor. So 5 years later, we still have no action on closing this loophole that absolutely could save lives and might have saved lives in Charleston.
It's unfortunate. I know that some people may think, oh, 2 weeks to wait for something is a hardship. It's a sacrifice. And, quite frankly, here we have what are often referred to as first world problems, right? Where we have to, oh my gosh, we have to wait for something. Imagine that. And I'm not making light of having to wait. We have all become so impatient in this day and age, and particularly in technology. We're used to instantaneous gratification. We want something, we click something, we get it, right? So, and being required to wait for certain things seems like an undue hardship for some. Is that the reason you think that the delay, or do you know why it hasn't been addressed from the Senate?
I think you're right that is part of it. There is pushback from pro-gun advocates, particularly from the gun lobby that includes gun manufacturers, that the pushback seems to say that because people have a legal right, because of the Second Amendment, to own guns, that anything that delays or restricts that, their ability to get these things that they can own legally, is something that in their minds is unconstitutional. And there's a lot of, it gets into a lot of questions about sort of where the limits of the Second Amendment are. And so I think that this is one where we already have limits. We have this maximum 3-day limit, and we require this background check. To me, I don't think it's really any different from requiring people to have insurance before they drive cars. And there are other ways that we restrict some of those freedoms for public safety.
Right.
And I think that this is another one of those. But there are certainly people that think that is too high a price to pay.
We do live, like I said, we live in a world of instantaneous gratification. It's challenging for anyone to, not for anyone, but for a lot of people to have any amount of their liberties restricted. And I think we see that a lot. I don't want to get too off the topic, but the debate and controversy around wearing masks now. In the midst of a public health crisis, a global pandemic, and the guidelines suggest that, one of the number one ways to, halt or at least delay or thwart transmission is through the wearing of face masks. And there are a lot of individuals who oppose it and see it as a restriction on their liberties and their rights, rather than looking at it from the perspective of a public health concern and how many other people's lives they could be saving, that they could be extending the life of, and just helping others by being, quote unquote, personally inconvenienced.
I agree. When I see this, those objections, what always springs to my mind is we spend a lot of time talking and hearing about rights that come with citizenship. But I think that it also comes with responsibility. And this is where I feel that the conversation needs to shift to responsibility to take care of those around us.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So you were talking about the advocacy work that Moms does on the legislative front, and how we're pushing. You were pushing for the closure of that Charleston loophole. Locally, though, there's some work that you've been doing here in Northwest Arkansas with some of our legislators. You want to share a little bit about the work that you've been doing locally?
Sure. And in Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas, all over the state, we have worked to develop good relationships with legislators and to advocate for what we see as responsible gun legislation here in Arkansas. So that has included everything from partnering with legislators on issues like making sure that people convicted of domestic violence don't have access to guns, and that we have a state law that matches what we see at the federal level for issues like that. We have worked to advocate against a stand your ground bill here in Arkansas that basically allows someone to legally use deadly force when they feel threatened and they feel like they're in danger, even if they would be able to safely retreat. So the law says you can't use deadly force unless it is impossible for you to retreat, and if you can retreat safely, you are expected to do so. Stand your ground removes that requirement to retreat, and has caused problems in other states. And we really don't want to see a law like that passed here. We have also worked with legislators supporting bills to make changes to the Arkansas campus carry laws that allow carriers of an enhanced concealed carry permit to carry concealed guns on our college campuses, in dorms, in bars, in churches, in government buildings, and other places where I think many people feel that guns are not safe and don't really have a place in the kind of work or experience that is happening in those spaces.
So with the campus carry, the bill that passed almost 3 years ago in 2017, or probably right at about 3 years ago, there's still action and movement and energy surrounding changing that law. And you've been working with some local legislators, Denise Garner being a strong advocate, Representative Garner being a strong advocate opposing this legislation.
Yes.
But she's not alone in her opposition. Who are some of the other folks, or at least groups, that don't think that having this type of campus carry is appropriate or needed?
So in 2017, when that law passed, there was very strong opposition to campus carry from every college in the state of Arkansas, from their faculty and staff senates, from student government associations, from campus police, as well as from campus administration. We also heard opinions and testimony from Arkansas State Police and local law enforcement, who were also concerned about the kinds of situations that this kind of law could allow for, and make their own jobs more dangerous. So what we heard a lot is the argument for these laws is that in a mass shooter situation, the argument is you want a good guy with a gun right there, to be that law enforcement response is slow, and you want a good guy with a gun right there to be able to take down the shooter and save lives. The problem that law enforcement has expressed with this logic is that when they come in, and their response time is pretty quick, when they come in the door, all they see is someone with a gun,
right,
who's not wearing a law enforcement uniform.
Right.
There's no tattoo across their forehead that says good guy or bad guy.
Right. Right.
And so it slows down, it puts the civilian in danger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it also puts them, the law enforcement, in a situation of having to make split-second decisions about who the actual threat is in that moment,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which could absolutely result in tragic consequences.
Yeah.
And of course, our law enforcement officers are trained to handle these kinds of situations. Somebody who has an extra 6 to 8 hours of training is not, does not have that kind of specialized training for de-escalation and being able to handle one of those emergency situations.
So we've got, current legislators who are opposed. We've got university officials in all walks of life, organizations, campuses that are opposed to it. You've got law enforcement who are opposed to it. Why is this? Why is it an issue? Why hasn't it already been overturned? What's going on?
So there's a couple of factors here. The first is that the proponents of this law truly believe that having students, faculty of the appropriate age, students, faculty, staff on campus, or parishioners in a church, or visitors to a government building, or even someone in a bar, who is, their argument is going to be that these people who are trained to handle firearms make these places safer through their presence, and that the fact that concealed weapons are allowed in these establishments deters someone from coming in. The argument they like to make is that gun-free zones basically invite mass shootings, although there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that, based on FBI reports on mass shootings. But that's always the argument, is that good guys with guns make everybody around them safer. So the other argument is that the gun lobby, particularly groups like the NRA, have strongly supported financially politicians who propose these bills and politicians who vote for these bills. So once the NRA, for example, grades a bill, which means they basically flag it as something that is important enough that it is going to reflect whether or not a legislator running for re-election gets their stamp of approval. So once they grade a bill, legislators who have traditionally sort of supported pro-gun bills are far less likely to vote against them, even if they don't necessarily think those bills are necessary, because they're concerned about losing those NRA ratings.
That's unfortunate. The substitution of logic, thinking that your thinking is better, superior, more informed than the actual individuals who are in those situations. So, greater than the university officials and administrators, greater than the parishioners, greater than the religious leaders, greater than law enforcement, that they know better than those people who would be directly impacted by individuals having the extra concealed weapons on those premises.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, we'll have a lot more momentum going forward, and to make some adjustments to that. Now, what I understand is that it's not a complete restriction. There is some room for modification, some compromise, like just not carrying it in the residence hall. Right. And there were some others, yeah.
At the end of the last legislative session, Representative Denise Garner, introduced a couple of bills that would have made some modifications to that law, including not allowing these guns in residence halls, or even allowing universities to opt out.
Allow them to exercise their own judgment as to whether or not they want.
And that's what we had before, that universities could opt in to allowing faculty and staff to conceal carry on campus. And we didn't have any universities that opted in to allow them to do that, which is why it sort of got forced. Universities were continuing to resist that. So it was very late in the session when Representative Garner introduced those bills. And so they didn't really get any traction, but we are hoping that we will see those again in the upcoming session next spring, and that there may be some room for movement.
That'd be great. That would be great. So one of the things we talked about was the Charleston loophole and trying to close that. There's another loophole that you and I were talking about called the gun show loophole that also needs a little bit of work. Can you share with everyone what exactly that gun show loophole is and what the work that Moms Demand Action is doing to kind of close that?
Sure. The gun show loophole has been recognized as a huge loophole that you can drive a Mack truck through for a long time, but unfortunately it hasn't been addressed. Essentially, the way current federal gun laws are structured, licensed gun dealers are required to conduct federal background checks before they can sell guns to make sure that someone is legally allowed to own one, because of course there are classes of people who are not allowed to own guns, people who have felonies, for example. Someone who's convicted of domestic violence. There are a number of things that can get you kind of on the no gun list.
Okay.
The problem is that only applies to licensed gun dealers. It doesn't include private sales and so what happens is, here in Arkansas, we see these signs on the interstate all the time, these huge billboards for gun show at the state fairgrounds, and these are big gun shows that licensed dealers do attend, but also a whole lot of unlicensed dealers. These are private sellers.
Okay.
Who have no requirement to do background checks. They can opt in to doing background checks, but many of them don't. So someone who could not walk in to a gun store, or a sporting goods store that sells firearms, and legally buy a gun, can simply wait a couple of days until the next big gun show, walk in and purchase a firearm with no record being kept of that, and without any background check being performed. So in terms of advocacy and legislation around this issue, one of the things that Moms Demand Action supports are more robust background checks here in the United States. And a bill addressing this issue and a number of other small loopholes passed the House and is also sitting on the desk of the Senate Majority Leader and is not going anywhere. And he's made it very clear it's not going to be brought to the floor.
And this is the one that includes prohibition against.
It would require any private seller to conduct the sale through a licensed gun dealer. So if I owned a firearm and you wanted to buy it from me, we would have to go through a licensed gun store, and I would give them the gun to hold, you would give them the cash to hold, they would perform the background check, and then the transaction would be done legally and above board, and background checks would be performed.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful solution as it relates to kind of closing that loophole. You're not requiring the unlicensed gun seller to acquire a license. They're still able to, sell the firearm, but there's also the enhanced protection, hopefully against someone who should not have a firearm actually acquiring one. And we were just talking about that.
I have a really hard time understanding opposition to, because I think we should all be able to agree that we don't want guns to fall into the hands of people that want to use them for illegal means.
Right.
want to use them to hurt someone else. I think no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, we should all be able to sign on to that.
Yes.
And this seems like such a good solution to try to make that happen. So it really baffles me what a reasonable objection to closing some of these obvious loopholes would be.
And in fact, the way that I understand it, at least like 80% of Americans poll agree with the legislation reform that Moms Demand Action is advocating for. So it's not as if you and your fellow moms are a fringe group or someone advocating a minority viewpoint. It's an overwhelming majority of Americans poll favor exactly what you're talking about. You're not talking about radical reform. You're talking about modifications to existing laws to make gun ownership more safe, to make and to make it.
Sometimes we're depicted, us in our bright red mom shirts. We're sort of depicted as anti-gun extremists. They love to call us gun grabbers.
So is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to go out and grab people's guns?
Absolutely not. I don't want your guns. Many of our members are gun owners. We're people who believe in responsible gun ownership and people who believe that we can respect the Second Amendment, but still focus on public safety, making sure that guns are stored safely, making sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't have access to them, which makes everyone safer.
And that leads to the enhanced background checks that you were talking about, ensuring that folks who have infractions such as domestic violence and other criminal convictions are on the no gun list, and for very good reason. We were talking about the high propensity of escalating violence in domestic violence situations, domestic disturbance calls that law enforcement officials are called to, and how quickly the tension and the emotion in those situations escalate. And when there is a firearm or some other gun involved, that the potential for further violence and harm and death is just exponential because of the presence of that firearm in that situation.
Absolutely. I've been told time and time again by law enforcement officers that the most dangerous situations that they walk into are domestic violence calls. And they are more likely to be shot in the line of duty in a domestic violence call than they are in any other kind of situation. And so it is in the best interest not only of protecting people in these situations, just the involved parties, but also protecting the law enforcement officers, the social workers who are going to have to come into these situations. And frankly, it's also about protecting children. What we absolutely know is that children are very frequently literally caught in the crossfire in domestic violence situations where firearms are involved. And so it's something that keeps everyone safe. And we think this is common sense, common sense gun laws and common sense fixes to some legislation that has a lot of holes.
And the thing I think that's interesting, and you hit on it just a second ago when you talked about making sure that you're educating and providing awareness as it relates to safe gun ownership. A lot of the work that Moms Demand Action does is actually just education and awareness in the community, providing that type of information and advocacy to folks who currently own guns, how to store them, how to use them, how to keep their children safe. There's a program that I understand is kind of similar to one that the NRA has as it relates to gun safety.
It is. We come at it from a slightly different angle. So the NRA's program is for children, and it is about teaching children never to touch guns. Now, I know you have children, as do I. And I think you probably know as well as I do what happens when you tell children not to do something. Like
Right.
you've just made it way more interesting and exciting for them.
Right, right.
But we believe, not only do we think that for many kids that's not necessarily practical advice, we also feel strongly that the onus of keeping children safe from unsecured firearms should be on the adult who owns the gun.
Yep. Yep.
And the parents of the child who need to sort of watch out for all of the dangers that kids can be exposed to. Mm-hmm. So we have a program that you mentioned. It's called our Be Smart program. And this is essentially a program for adults, parents, grandparents, babysitters, anybody who's going to spend time around kids or who have kids in their home, to help them make sure that they are doing their part to be responsible gun owners and keep kids safe, and also to help parents who may not have guns in their home to know what to do to help make sure that their child is not the victim of an unintentional shooting. It's actually the reason I got involved with moms a number of years ago. When my daughter was 2, there was a child in my community who was the same age as my daughter, and he found an unsecured loaded handgun in his father's nightstand. And he played with it because he was 2, and that's what kids do. And he fatally shot himself. And that's a heartbreaking incident. And as a mother of a young child the same age, it really affected me. And it made me realize that like these are things that can be prevented. That would never have happened if that gun had had a trigger lock, if that gun had been stored unloaded, if that gun had been in a gun safe. There's so many ways to keep these unintentional shootings of children from happening. But unfortunately, they happen here in America far too regularly. So this Be Smart program is really close to my heart because I feel like children no one deserves to be the victim of gun violence, but children are particularly innocent in this. And so I think it's a program that's really important. And one of the things that for me as a parent, really just the light bulb came on, when I take my daughter for a play date, or even when we go to a family member's home that we don't visit often, I have a million questions because I'm that mom.
Yes,
like
I understood. Yeah.
Do you have pets? Do you have, if my daughter's allergic to something, like do you have this in the house? And cool, and all the other things that I worry about as a mom. It never occurred to me when she was really little that I would ever need to ask about guns.
Yeah, I've never, me either.
And then that happened. And I started doing some volunteering with moms, and I learned about this program, and I went, oh my gosh, like just asking that question. So now I'm really that mom. Like she goes for a play day, like we're talking about guns before we walk in that house. And it has spurred some really important conversations with other parents. The reaction I get most often when I ask about guns in the home is, oh my gosh, I've never thought to ask that before. And so I feel like when it's helpful, I mean, it makes me feel better as a parent, knowing that my daughter and her friends aren't going to find a shotgun under somebody's bed. But it also, I think, makes me feel good because I think there's kind of a little chain reaction that that friend's parent is more likely to start asking about that as well.
And it takes me back to the saying, when we know better, we do better.
Exactly.
Right. So if folks want to do better and know more about responsible gun ownership, responsible gun storage, I understand that you guys go to churches, schools, different neighborhood organizations, tea parties, however people want to gather, you're able and willing to do that. Have you all had to modify the program during COVID-19?
We have. So right now, when we're asked, so we do these presentations on our Be Smart program and we'll talk to anyone who's interested. I mean, invite us, we'll come. Backyard cookout, we'll be there, doesn't matter. We've talked to neighborhood watch groups. We've talked to PTAs. We've talked to church groups, Boy Scout and Girl Scout parents. We've done house parties in neighborhoods where somebody just invites all the neighborhood parents and says, come on over and listen to this. Pretty much we will go anywhere and share this. We also try to have tables at as many community events as we can. We distribute free gun locks along with information about the program and trying to help people understand how to use these gun locks and how to do so safely. Mm-hmm. So during COVID, when we've been asked to do these, clearly they have to be done virtually. Right. And but I think the message is still there. We are able to still get that across. It's a little hard to get the free gun locks to people, but we'll do porch drop-offs where okay. It's important for us to be able to make sure that we're still making a difference in the community and hopefully keeping community members safer.
So if individuals or groups, anyone who's watching here has an interest in learning more about the Be Smart program and would love to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
So the best way to get information on the Be Smart program or any of the legislative initiatives that we've talked about, or just Moms Demand Action in general, will be to go to our website. So you can just Google Moms Demand Action, and we're a part of the Everytown for Gun Safety Network that was also founded after the shooting at Sandy Hook. So it includes Mayors Against Illegal Guns. We have several Arkansas mayors that are part of that group that are working on keeping illegal guns off the streets of our cities. We have the Everytown Research Network that does a lot of data crunching and looking at information on shootings nationwide. And then we have Moms Demand Action, which is sort of our activist group. So you can find a lot of information on our website. We also encourage people to text, if they're interested in becoming part of our organization, volunteering for our organization, texting the word join to 64433. And it will immediately ping you back and get information and allow local moms to get in touch with you and let you know kind of what we're doing. Right now, our meetings are virtual, but hopefully we'll all be able to see each other in person again soon.
So if there's one nugget that you could leave everyone with here today, Jessica, what would that one nugget be?
You know, I think for me, it would be that when we started doing this work here in Arkansas, we could not get anybody to talk to us. We would go to the Capitol in our red t-shirts and sometimes kids in tow, and we got were closed doors. Nobody wanted to touch this issue. Since Sandy Hook, we have seen so many mass shootings in America, very high profile mass shootings. Charleston, Tree of Life, Parkland, El Paso, there's so many, Las Vegas. And I think every time we have another one of these horrific events, it makes more and more people recognize that this is an issue that we have to address. And you know what? When we go to the Capitol now, people talk to us. We have people who support us. And so I think my nugget would be that this issue is movable. It is something that we have seen a huge shift, even in a state like Arkansas, which has a strong hunting culture, and people really are protective of this idea of gun ownership and gun culture. We feel like we are making real strides. And so my nugget would be, this is not an unwinnable issue, and we'd love to have more people on board helping us.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, you've already given the information how folks can get connected with Moms Demand Action and how they can request resources and support from our organization. And so if you have an interest in supporting the work that Moms Demand Action does, you know, you have that available to you.
You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We're everywhere.
Awesome. You're everywhere. That's amazing. So there's really, so if there's a desire, then the opportunity avenue is there. So
Yeah.
I would invite each of you, if you have an interest in gun sense legislation and sensible gun reform, please contact the representatives there here at Moms Demand Action. And also, if you have an interest in supporting candidates who support the gun sense legislation, here's one right here. You have an opportunity to support this campaign as well. So please drop your email address in the comments if you're not already connected to our newsletter distribution. Continue to follow us on Facebook. Go back to the website to volunteer, RonettaFrancis.org. And we will just continue to do what we can to help our fellow neighbors to stay safe, whether it's wearing a mask or proposing sensible gun legislation reform to help protect our fellow Arkansans. So thank you so much, Jessica, for your time this morning. Thank you for sharing your information with us. Thank you for sharing the distinction between what it is that you all are advocating for and drawing a line between, fact versus fiction as it relates to the positions that your organization takes. So
well, and I want to thank you, Ronetta, for being a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate. That's a really exciting thing for us, and we're really looking forward to supporting your campaign.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And to everyone out there, have a very, very wonderful Saturday afternoon. Enjoy Juneteenth, as it were, and learn more about the history of our country and race relations and how to be gun smart. There's a lot that we have an opportunity to educate ourselves on, and now is really the time to lean in and do what we can to be all about sustainable change. So thank you again so much, Jessica. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining, and be safe and be well. Have a good day.